Hello and welcome again. So this is the our final episode of the India Futures Lab, and we have with us the esteemed Robert Stephens from his homeland of Bangalore. He's sitting in stones that are mirroring the well under his house. But yeah, thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I think your practice, I think within the realm of speculative fiction and dreaming impossible scenarios grounded in extremely deep research and extremely methodical archival studies is one of the kind of beacons of speculative thinking in the country today, which is why I felt like your lecture would be the best way to end this course, in the sense that it's a practice that's shaped by speculation in many ways, and speculation not coming out of this attitude of I think therefore it should be speculation, but rather a fairly deep inquiry into archives, into everything that makes urbanism. So I'm super excited to share your work with our studio. And also, I think the fun part about you closing out this studio is that your practice is actually shaped by speculation in many ways. So for practitioners and students in the group who would want to take speculation a bit more seriously and integrate it as a big part of their process in their work and future projects, in many ways, it'll be lovely to hear from you what it's been like to build a practice on speculation. So with that,
Lovely.
I'm going to shut up.
Great.
Welcome,
Thank
Robert.
you.
Thank you again so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just going to say, if you hear kids screaming in the background while I'm speaking, just ignore them. So let me try this sharing. Yeah. Great. So thanks, Ayaz. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I've had a lot of fun preparing this discussion. So I hope it comes through. I hope y'all enjoy. So this is where I grew up. It's 815 Beauregard Road in Somerville, South Carolina. It basically, my home hasn't changed in the last 42 years. This is where I went to high school at Stratford High School, and I had my first art class in this room. It's a really special place. And if you were at Frame, you heard me talk about this drawing a bit. This was the very first drawing I remember making as a piece of art. It was a still life, it was a blind contour. And in Frame, we really went deep into it. It's like a whole chapter of life itself. But this was the first, this was like the book in ninth grade of high school. And this was just about the last drawing I made in high school. And I see it and I wonder what happened? What happened to me in high school? But I remember vividly making this piece, and it was actually my first speculation, I think, in retrospect. And it was inspired by this book, completed in 1320 by Dante, and it's called The Divine Comedy. And it's basically a speculation of after he dies, what the afterlife looks like. And it's a classic of literature. It's now about 700 years old. And it's a work that's inspired artists around the world over the last 700 years. This is an artwork in the Vatican, I believe by Botticelli. This is another drawing. I'm not sure who made this, but a diagram of what Dante saw in the afterlife, what he wrote about. Then this is an artist visualizing it. And this piece that I made, it was basically part of Dante's experience of hell. So you see this sign, I am the way to hell. In all of these drawings, I made each of these seals in a way. They were responding visually to something he had written. And I remember being very intrigued and being able to see in my mind what he was writing and then taking it and making it into this imagination with colored pencils. And it was a really fantastic experience. And I still have this artwork with me at home in Somerville. So that was last year of high school. Then I went to Virginia Tech for architecture studies. And the end of my first year, Pia Sarpaneva, she was a Finnish professor, fabulous teacher. She gave us this project. She said, read Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. And this is, some of you may know this work. It's again a literary speculation, I think about 55 fictitious cities. And Marco Polo is describing what he's seeing, what he's experiencing in really intriguing ways. And the brief was to pick a city that moved you and then to speculate what it might have looked like in massing in a physical object. And this is what I came up with. I unfortunately can't remember which city I picked. I do have an archival notebook somewhere. I want to dig out and find it because I'm now really intrigued. But I remember making this model and being fascinated by the idea of layers, that cities are places that accumulate over time, both figuratively and literally. So we stacked wood layers and then shaved them. And then I remember being intrigued by material and seeing how the grains of wood bend when you cut them differently. And it's something that I've more recently been exploring with my own work. And then being intrigued by the unbuilt space, the negative space of a city, the central, the core axis mundi, where people gather. And this was my first architectural tryst with speculation in a way. Then second year, we this was our studio. It was about 2 years before there was a computer on every desk, but at this point, everything was done with parallel bars, pins, pencils, and right angles. Two rolls of film on my desk in the foreground. There's a scientific calculator and a notebook. And I just love you couldn't imagine how things would change within just a few years. And in that studio, Jay Stokul, our professor, he was my favorite mentor throughout all of, at that point, 19 years of life. He gave us our first building project, and it was a house, and it was a house for Henry David Thoreau, the naturalist, the transcendentalist. And the irony of this project was that this house was to be in the city of Philadelphia, right? A dense urban environment. And he said to get to know the client, your client's dead, of course, so you have to get to know them through their writings. And again, much like Italo Calvino's work, going deep into writings to understand the way someone thinks about the world. We read Thoreau's writing on reading, which was fascinating. I made notes all throughout. I remember making this note. This is my ideas for Thoreau's house, that there should only be one stair, and you must go outside, then turn and enter the study. So the thought that Thoreau's process of going to study would be like a ritual of going out and coming in. And then we read on. This is a few lines I really enjoyed. Thoreau says, I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. I'm waiting for a client to come to me with a brief like this, like so dense and internalized. So the fabulous part of this experience was it was this combined, this Italo Calvino and then Thoreau is starting with a text with literary work and then being pushed to move that into something visual, in this case, a drawing, formerly a model. And this was really the first kind of formal exploration of speculation where we were taught how to speculate. And this is what I thought Thoreau's house might look like. I thought from the street you would enter a really discreet door. You would pass through a courtyard. And then my idea was the center of the ground floor, the living dining, would be this kind of abstract geologic object. Then on the first floor would be a study in his bedroom. I thought maybe on the wall there would be a trilobite fossil embossed in the concrete. Of course, lots of bookshelves. And then on the top floor was to be a study next to a fireplace overlooking a terrace garden. And then when it all stacked up, I thought maybe Thoreau would connect with the geologic layers beneath. This idea of layering is continuing in my mind. And then we thought, as a recognition of those layers beneath, maybe the walls of his space would also be different pigments of concrete, so you feel like you're yet embedded in the earth. And that was it. That was my favorite project of college. I studied here in Virginia. This is roughly Virginia, and South Carolina is not far. And then after my studies, after 5 years of studies, I moved to Bombay. And a common question I get is, how did you come to India? It's a fundamental question. South Carolina, India, it's not really terribly connected. And the answer is very obvious. I flew. This is more or less what the airport looked like when I landed in 2006. But this is, of course, an image. This is an image from the 1970s. And the airport might have looked very different when I landed if Buckminster Fuller's plan had been realized. Now, we don't know exactly what his plan for the Bombay airport looked like. In literary text, it's described as a segmented arch. I like to think of that as maybe a geodesic dome type of form. But what we do have is Fuller's description, which he gave to a journalist in 1983. And this is Fuller, and this is what he said about the Bombay airport. It shouldn't be a railroad station with travelers standing in rows, sweating, worrying about their luggage in one place and kids in another. It shouldn't be a worry house, a smelly house, a place where you have to tolerate and put up with things. There shouldn't be a single door or anything to push. There shouldn't be any lines to stand in. It's absurd. I love that. What a great description of an airport. So 2006, I'm in Bombay. This is now me 20 years ago. Crazy to think how quickly that time has passed. And let's say for the first 2, 3 years, every weekend without fail, I would just walk the streets, mostly of central Bombay. And often they were just incredible walks, and they would often end here at Flora Fountain, partly because it was shaded. There was always this huge canopy, but also because I love books, and this was and is a used book epicenter in Bombay. And I started to collect books when I've been collecting about 18 years. Most of these have come from Flora Fountain. But the very first kind of really special book I remember finding was this one, Report on the Development Plan for Greater Bombay, 1964. There was a huge map in the back, and it was the minute I held it, I knew it was a gem. And inside one of the chapters, there were these photographs of geological outcrops of artifacts, much like in Thoreau's house. And they were just beautiful. I love these images. This is, of course, Gilbert Hill. And what I find fascinating about these images, just geology in general, is you often take these moments where you can see outcrops, where you can see rock at the surface, and then you take these moments and you stitch them into a bigger picture, a geologic map such as this one. It's a form of speculation. I love that. And when I think about the way geologists work in speculation, I'm reminded of Laura Popik's book, which I've just completed. Fabulous book. I highly recommend it. It's called Strata, Stories from Deep Time. And she says this: while the fields of physics or engineering or biomedicine provide satisfying answers to concrete questions, stratigraphy offers drafts of stories that must remain open to revisions as new techniques and new minds work to tackle them from different angles over the years. Now, my passion is speculative nonfiction, and I think in many ways, stratigraphy and speculative nonfiction, they share this similar premise that we're working with bits and pieces that we find in our human past, in the Earth's past, and then we create stories out of them, and they're drafts in a way. And perhaps as new stories and new information is found, maybe the works we make will refine and will revise by new minds and new individuals. And I like that very much. This was the first book that captivated my mind on Bombay's Unbuilt Past. It's from 1869. It's professional papers on Indian engineering. And there was this kind of unassuming chapter called The Drainage of Bombay. I was reading it one day, and in the middle of this chapter was a fold-out map, gorgeous fold-out map. And there was this green blob right in the middle. And I was intrigued. What does this green blob have to do with drainage? So I zoomed in, looked really deeply, and saw this phrase, proposed park. Oh, and it was connected in a way to the drainage plan at the time. And I was fascinated. And in the footnote of the text, the author Hector Tulik said, this proposed park is not my idea. I cannot take credit for it. It's the idea of this gentleman, Arthur Crawford, who, of course, we know as Crawford Market. And I found that very nice, giving credit, because credit's something it's often overlooked in big ideas, especially. And Crawford was imagining this green blob, this 400-acre space, as a people's park such as London does not possess. So it was this bold, really bold global move. And one of the things I love when I started to learn more about this plan, it wasn't just a park. At the entrance to the park, Crawford said there should be a statue. Okay, and the statue was of a fool in a cap. And at the base of the statue, there was to be a phrase in 4 languages. Okay, so everyone could read that phrase. And the phrase said, forgive us, for we know not what we did. And it was a statue that was meant to shame the previous municipal commissioners who had dumped all of the city's waste on this land, this 400-acre piece of land, the low-lying area. It was to shame them and say that was a mistake. And now Crawford's plan was to take this wasteland and transform it into a public park, and in doing so, score political mileage. But I love to speculate on what would have happened, say, had this been built, the statue, and been successful, the statue of shame. I think now when there's political upheaval, we often see the victors celebrated. But had Crawford's system happened and succeeded, I think we would have had a situation where when there's a political transition, you publicly shame the opponent, the loser per se, and it would have transformed possibly how we interact in our political and public worlds. So I was intrigued, and this idea that Crawford had, I thought there must be more, and I found out he wrote about a lot of these plans in a book called The Development of New Bombay. He wrote this about 50 years before Charles Correa pins the phrase New Bombay. And I went on World Catalog to see where can we find this book, and there was one copy globally at the University of Minnesota. So I wrote to them. I said who I am, what I'm looking for, and they said, yeah, we have it. We'll find it and send you a scan. And then about a week later, I get an apology email that it's not on the shelf. It's nowhere to be found. Ugh. And I was devastated because I was so looking forward to this book. And then I found out through Miriam Dosol that the Asiatic Library has a copy in Bombay. So I became a member. It's a tumultuous process, very painful. I had to have multiple people vouch for my character, which was a longer process than I expected. But this was my library card. I did not look happy, but it did the job. I got in and found this book, the only known copy globally. Now, the unique thing was it's not to be issued out of the library, so it stayed there. I did manage to get a Xerox. So took a Xerox, I Xeroxed the cover, and I mentally made a note, like a photograph in my mind of the colors of the cover, this kind of red ochre. And then in Photoshop, I recreated that cover and made my own copy. So now there are two globally, and I feel very proud and happy about that. It sits next to me here in my space. And so this started the journey. I started collecting plans, unbuilt plans, things that fascinated me of worlds that existed but yet never existed. And I ended up sourcing material from, I think, about 30 different archives, offices, libraries around the world. And they all came together in this black document that I called the Manuscript. And for about 8 years, that manuscript grew here in my wardrobe. And it grew and it evolved. And then, quite frankly, I gave up. And it was probably for about a year. I completely and totally gave up on the idea. I had always wanted to make a book out of these plans, but I gave up. It was overwhelming. I had more information than I thought I would ever have. And that just, it washed over me. And I told Tina, I said, this book will never happen. Tina's my wife. And she said, it will when the time is right. Now, note to everyone, women are just about always right. So that's just a small aside. She was right, but I didn't believe it for the longest time. The second thing that happened is I met a publisher, not for the Bombay book, but for something else. I had a draft of another book in the works. I showed the publisher. They weren't the least bit interested, and it was quite discouraging. And I said, while we were just wrapping up, I said, I have a lot of research on unbuilt plans for Bombay. I'll never be able to do the book. If you would like the material, I'll give you, and you can find someone to write it. And he wasn't the least bit interested. And in retrospect, of course, I'm relieved because it would have changed the course of my life if he had taken it. But that was the second thing that happened. And it's like I gave up, met a publisher who wasn't interested. So it was like bad. And then the pandemic happened. And the pandemic changed my life. It changed our family's life, despite the difficulties, all in good ways. And I realized in the pandemic that the previous 8 years were incubation. I had never heard that phrase. I've just recently learned about it. And it was a deeply necessary incubation phase. And so a lot of things happened one after the other. To begin with, in the pandemic, I was working at an architecture firm in Bombay. I used to travel from Bandra to Fort to Bandra every day. So in the pandemic, all of a sudden I had an hour and a half at the beginning and an hour and a half at the end of every day to myself. And it was like a new life. I could explore things all of a sudden. So the first thing I had time as bookends of the day. Then I stumbled upon this book, Never Built New York. It's as fascinating as it sounds, Unbuilt Plans for New York City. But what was fabulous in this book, it was like a eureka moment for me. The text was minimal. The images were big, bold, and beautiful. And if you've seen Bombay Imagined, you'll realize I basically copied this format. I loved it, and I still love it in its simplicity. And this book, this format, it lifted the weight which I had been carrying of what I thought a book should look like, because a lot of books around me in the architectural world were very different from this one. So this was the first kind of discovery in the pandemic, which started to change and deeply impact the course of my work and my life. The second thing that happened, I think I randomly picked up this book from Kitab Khana, Writing Badly is Easy, by Amitava Kumar. He teaches English in the US. He's from Patna originally. And this book changed my writing life. Again, before Kumar's reading his work, for me, writing was heavy, it was dense, it was academic, not because I wanted it to be, but because almost every architecture book I had seen around my world at the time was like that. It was verbose. And Amitabha Kumar came in and shattered all of that. When I downloaded this image from his website to save this image, the file name which he picked for this image is Jargon Slayer 2. And jargon, of course, is just too many words without meaning, pointlessly using them. So we're first thing from this book, we're going to slay jargon. We're going to get rid of that and get straight to the point, the core essence of what we're creating with words. And what he talks about in this book is let us write with a sense of surprise. Let us write with humor. Let's have fun. And he tells a story in the book how in many academic circles he's in, if you give an academic writer a brief of telling a murder story, they'll start by saying, in this article, I'm going to explain to you that it was the butcher who murdered Thomas. And then you tell the whole mystery story, but you already know what's going to happen because of this very boring introduction. And ever since he's, no, let us lead with surprise. Let's lead people on this mystery, even if the text is academic or nonfiction in subject matter. Let us have more fun. And I love that. And that also, it impacted how I present. You will never ever hear me present by saying, in this talk, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. You have no idea where we're going next. And that's by design. And it's inspired by Amitabha Kumar. He also introduced me through this book to Anton Chekhov, a writer, a Russian writer. And Chekhov's 6 principles that make for a good story are these, which I love. And I think they apply to writing, but also to visual speculation and creation. Absence of lengthy verbiage of a political, social, economic nature, total objectivity, truthful descriptions of persons and objects, extreme brevity. This is my favorite, extreme brevity. I love it. Audacity and originality. Yes. And then compassion. Yeah. If you can wrap these 6 into a story, you're onto something. So the pandemic's raging. I have this manuscript, this 8 years of research that's sitting in my cupboard. We have this new kind of energy that's coming, visual energy from Never Built New York. And then we have Amitabha Kumar that's pushing us on a direction for a new way of writing, a fun way of writing that's also full of energy and excitement. So I realized pandemic was not going to end quickly. So I said, let us write and write. So we ended up expanding the book to 200 projects. And for 200 days straight, I wrote. It was very intense. I had very little social media engagement for those 200 days because I felt in my mind there was limited space. I did not read the news in the morning, as again, it would have distracted me from what I was focused on. I slept almost every day by 9 p.m. Before going to sleep, I would prearrange my coffee and breakfast at night. So when I woke up, I would just have to click one button and it would be ready. I didn't have to get things out of the cupboards and do a lot of work. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. every day, and that gave me about from 5 to 7 to focus before anyone else was up, and super focus time, no messages, no emails, no phone calls, just hyper focus on creating. And during this whole time period, I turned down any request for my time or mental engagement that encroached upon this system. So if Ayaz had asked me to give this talk during this 200-day time period, I would have said absolutely no chance. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I thought, and I love writing. This is my handwriting. It's a little bit like chicken scratch. And W.H. Alden says most people enjoy the sight of their own handwriting as they enjoy the smell of their own farts. And I think that's completely true. I love it. And Bonnie wrote with me, our cat. She was very helpful in the morning. And I realized quickly as these texts are evolving and I'm starting to get more focus and I'm starting to see the clear path of what this creative work needs to become. I realized needed many more people on the team. It was not something I would do alone. So this is Fawaz. If you see or have Bombay Imagined, he's the first person in the acknowledgements page. Bombay Imagined would not exist without him. I wrote to him and said it was pandemic, so everything was email and Zoom. I said, can we work together for 4 months on this creative project? And he said, sure. And it ended up being 22 months that we worked together. We shared over 600 emails, of course, dozens of Zoom calls, and it was fabulous. And Fawaz, he did many things. One of the things he did was create this matrix, this very unattractive but deeply practical and performative matrix. And for every project in Bombay Imagined, every Unbuilt project, it would have data. And one of those data points was the drawing. First, whether there was a drawing or not. And I had this kind of internal turmoil because there were many projects that were just deeply fascinating. And I could, again, like Dante's Divine Comedy, I could see in my mind what was happening, but there was no archival image. So we had this, and this is one such project. This is from the India office records, and it was a project for Samuel Perk's lift wheels, which were giant sewage lifting wheels. And this is literally all we had, a couple of pages of text like this. We had criticism of his scheme, Wilcox and Tracy, who actually designed what was built. They criticized Perk's scheme as saying perhaps the most extraordinary proposition ever yet made public for the drainage of any town. Really bold statements. And I thought, we need an image of this. And we had text. We said, let's make a drawing, right? Let's speculate, just like I had started to explore with Calvino's work, with Thoreau, but this time now we're coming from a historian's perspective, but we need to now work with an artist perspective as well, not just an architectural perspective or urban planning perspective. I'm not a digital artist, so I asked around and was put in touch with this gentleman, Aniket Umaria, and I wrote to him and explained what I was thinking as a project. And he said, absolutely, I'm interested. I'm super excited. And I realized the more from our initial conversations and even our conversations, which continue today, the more creative our work is, the more inspired our collaborators will be, and they're equally proportional. It was a big learning for me. So I sent Aniket drawings like this. This is an India office map with my annotations on it of inputs and thoughts, all kinds of notes. I shared section drawings with him, so you get some technical data as well. References of lift wheels, because the first project we worked on was Samuel Perk's lift wheels. So these were lift wheels from the time period, from the region. And then I made this sketch of how I thought it would all come together. And then I shared this all with Aniket, and he worked over the course of about a month, and he made something like this, and just slowly over time added layers. That's Haji Ali in the background, for example. That's Kumbala Hill. And then this is a carcass with vultures chewing away flesh. And I just love it. This is Samuel Perk's plan to lift sewage out of Bombay's main town drain to dump it into a funnel, which at the bottom right of the image. And then that funnel was to take sewage into the Arabian Sea. And I just imagine being a resident in a horse-drawn carriage near the flats and seeing this giant lift whale circulating in the horizon would have been totally crazy. And when we made, I knew that because it was artistic, it was fascinating, but it was also historical. I knew we were onto something and there was something special here. So all of a sudden, this column with drawings and the rows which said there were no drawings, these became really unique opportunities to do something special. And it really got all of us excited. So we went back to Crawford's book. And his book, again, was all text, all written words, but deeply interesting work. So we'll look at a few of Crawford's projects. This was 1865, Backley blowpipes. And this would have been the largest scale ventilation scheme ever proposed for Bombay. This was the sketch I made. There were a few others that I couldn't find, but from the sketch, we ended up making this. And basically, Crawford's plan was through Malabar Hill, through Kumbala Hill, through Worley Hill, to drill these huge urban scale tunnels, which were to capture the sea breeze. And that sea breeze was then to jet go through the center of the city and wash out, in terms of airflow, all the microbes and bacteria. Totally crazy plan. And Crawford said, if you don't believe me, make a model of the scheme and test it. So this speculation is his model being made in a workshop and tested. So that was the idea. Those were his tunnels through the hills. Same gentleman, same book, the first plan for Bombay's coastal road in the 1870s, looking about 150 plus years ago. And as part of the coastal road, he said there should be a tunnel through Malabar Hill. We should carve this tunnel through Malabar Hill. All the excavated material from this tunnel will be used to landfill Bombay's Western Bombay Island's western edge to create a straight line for horse-drawn carriages. And so then this was the speculation Aniket made. If you look at the top, you'll see a bat hanging. I love that bat. This was the landfill, which was to be material cut from the tunnel. And the crazy thing about this scheme, he called it a comprehensive, bold, and costly project, no doubt. And he was absolutely right. More or less, a version of his scheme is now built. This is the Mumbai coastal road now, and everything in brown is reclaimed land. A lot of that material has come from a tunnel cut through Malabar Hill. And this land looks like this, more or less looks like this today as well. Look at a few more speculations. This is Herbert Phipson, 1888, and he has this imagination for a zoo at Chowpatty, also Malabar Hill. And he says, we would suggest as an admirable site for the proposed zoological gardens, the Chowpatty Cliff, with all the broken ground and swampy land at the bottom. And he has a lengthy text, but again, it's only written text, right? But deeply vivid, deeply descriptive. Aniket worked on this one as well. So I found this map with contours, made some notes, sent this to him. I found this reference image and thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if, because 1888, the mills are coming up, there's smoke churning through the skyline. What if the zoo overlooked the mills in central Bombay? So made a sketch, combined these things, and we said at its essence, this will be an animal kingdom. And then Aniket worked and added layers, modeled, and then this is what he came up with, and I absolutely love it. This is the Chowpatty Cliff Zoo. It's fabulous. Yeah, I look at all the animals just for fun sometimes. There are hippos in the background in the middle right, if you look closely. Now, the most complex piece in the book, and I'm going to take my time going through this evening. I hope that the time's not crazy. This is a statue of Indira Gandhi at Neriman Point. This is from the 1980s. And this is Oleg Komov. He was a Russian sculptor. To his right, our left, as you can see, M.F. Hussein. And Komov was commissioned to make the sample of this statue, which was then to be really large at Neriman Point, much like the Statue of Liberty in New York City. What we had for this speculation, we had this newspaper article and we had this image of Komov and his mock-up, his sample statue. And then we just had a lot of fun with it. So I made a sketch, lots of notes. This, believe it or not, this is supposed to be Indira Gandhi. And the first, we had, I think, about 4 collaborators on this one image. The first individual was Anil Jaiswar. I never met him. I never saw him. I think he exists because he produced work and we paid him money. But it was like this totally mysterious person. He designs characters for games. He's a character designer. So he made from that image, he made this model of Indira Gandhi. And we did multiple iterations through Fawaz. And this is the character he made of her, completely 3D modeled. And it was just brilliant. So this was one piece of the speculation done. And there you can see how we tried to speculate based on this really kind of basic newspaper article image. Then we worked with Rimshi Agarwal. This is me sharing some reference from Dogman. I don't know why I was sharing Dogman with her. She created the context, Komov Studio. So we found some reference images of what Komov Studio in Moscow looked like. We tried to recreate the scale of that studio. Then we took these model components and shared them with this individual, Yanis, and his partner, Lambros. Yanis is based in Berlin. Lambros is in Athens. And they're just incredible artists. So they took those models and they created this scene, right? This really kind of dynamic scene. And I just love it. And I can feel the grit of Komov working in this space. But Komov himself was missing from this image. Then the image went back to Rimshi. And I said, Rimshi, I have this book, and Komov is on the cover of the book. I said, can we use this image and place him in the speculation? So we did that. That's Komov at work on his sample sculpture while the large scale is behind him. And this is the piece. And I love it for the complexity of collaborators that were involved because everyone played a really critical and essential role to making it what it is now. I think the last scheme we'll talk about is Ajit Bhattacharyaji's Car-Free Bombay, 1973. This is my favorite unbuilt plan from Bombay Imagined. And this is what he said in 1973. The car-free area, it's what it sounds like, car-free area, could stretch from Kolaba to Mahim Creek. The basic sacrifice required of the affluent Mbara Sahibs would be more an attitude rather than convenience. So it's this deeply almost socialist plan. And one day I was walking at Tulsi Pipe Road in Lower Parel, and I said, this is the perfect space. Like, how might this street have transformed if his scheme had come to life? I took this image and then made a sketch on top of it, how I thought things might transform. Bhattacharya basically said, with less cars on the road, half of the street can become public green, urban commons, other half can be bus lanes. So this is basically what we created. And then Fawaz had little fun and we changed it from Tulsi Pipe Road to Tulsi Pipe Parkway, like a pun on words. So we had a lot of fun with it. And then, so there were, I think, about 27 maybe speculations in the book. And then we combined those with unrealized just plans, which I also personally consider speculations. This was Henry Connie Bear's well pavilions to have covered wells adjacent to tanks in the island city. This was Hector Tulik's sewage irrigation fields, which took all the waste of the city, laid it out on this land at Kurla, Chambur, Bandra, and Dharavi for irrigating crops. This Dharavi 1945 master plan, which had a library and garden in the very center, very idealistic utopian scheme. And then this was James Troopshaw's plan for Gothic makeover for St. Thomas Cathedral in Fort. And there was to be this exhaust detail in the roof, which I think was very sensitive and beautiful to cool the space. And so we took all these plans, which all of this is evolving through the pandemic, generally in those early morning and late evening time slots. And the teams building, Fawaz, Aniket, Yanis, Rimshi, and then Deshna and Carol joined the team. They're book designers. They helped us. just take all of this and structure it into an elegant object with beautiful page layouts. And that became the first edition, which came out in 2022. And these are just some images from the inside. You can, if you remember the Never Built New York reference images, you can see the similarities and the simplicity of the page layouts, very directly inspired by that. It was 200 plans from 1670 to 2025, 2022 when it came out. Now, around the same time, so 2022, the book came out. 2023, we moved to Bangalore. We made this huge life shift as a family. We moved to this neighborhood, Krishnappa Garden, and we ended up building a small house here in the center of the neighborhood. And this is our home. It's a 1,950 square foot space. It's our home. It's an architecture studio where my team and I work, and it's a public library. This is all of our water comes from an open well. This is the well. You can see Bonnie. Bonnie's still with us. She's at the left of this image. I like to think in retrospect, this well was subconsciously inspired by Henry Conybeare's wells from 1854 in Bombay. This is our staircase, part of the city's part of the library. The very center of the house is the library, is the book core. And anyone can visit. You pick a book, you go sit downstairs, you overlook the garden. And I think again, subconsciously, this was inspired by the Dharavi 1945 plan, which placed the library at the center of a neighborhood, center of community spaces. This is the space where I'm sitting now. When you look up, it's my study and workspace. And to get to this space, you go outside of the house. You take this staircase and you turn and enter. So it's almost like this ritual. Even though it's vertically connected, it's spatially outside the house. And I realize in retrospect, this is Thoreau's house in many ways, where I thought he would only have one stair and he must go outside and turn and enter the study. I was as much writing about my future life as I was writing about his past life when I made this note. As you go upstairs, you get to the more domestic spaces within the house. There's Kai. We have a lot of split levels. His bedroom's on a split level. And then as you go up, you realize the living spaces are like a giant cave, lime plaster cave. And hot air rises through the space and goes out through an exhaust fan in the ceiling in that skylight that you see at the top right. And I think, again, subconsciously inspired by Trubshaw's exhaust chimney from St. Thomas Cathedral from 1864. And I love seeing these connections across centuries. They fascinate me to no end. And this is Tina. That's Misty. Misty joined us about 6, 7 months ago. He's on the left. And Tina said, when the house is done, I want to do something about the lake. And the lake she's referring to is this one. It's at the entrance of our neighborhood. And her basic brief is, listen, you have a lot of imagination. You're very good at seeing things differently than they actually are. So use that for the lake as well, not just for your own house. And this is the lake as it was at the time. You can't even see it. The lake's on the left behind the overgrowth. And that was it at the time as well. And I said, we'll work on the lake, but we need to know the big picture of this area, of this new neighborhood that we call home. Which in red, this is Bagmane Tech Park. It's one of the first tech parks constructed in Bangalore in 2000, early 2000s. It was completed. And I was very curious what preceded the tech park and how might that relate to the lake. So we asked around our neighborhood, and Mayur, one of our neighbors, had a huge family album with images that predate the tech park. And it was just paddy field. It was this very expansive environment. And you could see two different villages in the distant background. And I love these images and I can see this land. This is what it looked like when my in-laws moved to this neighborhood in the late 1990s. And then I looked at old maps from 1940, and this map, you can see the lakes. But what intrigued me were these 6 blue dots. And I looked at the legend of this map, and it said they're stone-lined wells. And it's exactly what we created here about 3 years ago. stone-lined wells. And I love that because the ground does not forget. Even though we forget, the ground does not forget. And then I did as much research I could in terms of written material. And in 1901, the Irrigation Commission in South India said this: tanks were the life of the people. And I love that sentence. Tanks, such a simple but deep sentence. Tanks were the life of the people. And so then I look at this plan, which is the way it is now. And we said, let's imagine this 300 years ago. And I think it would have looked something like this based on the maps and family photos. And then we said, let's take this kind of two-dimensional macro view. And what if we speculated in real life? If this is what it looks like today. What might this exact same view look like 300 years ago? Let us speculate backwards. And it would have looked something like this, with the tank on the left, the bund where people would walk, and then the paddy field, which we know from photos exists on the right. And when I see this, I realize tanks were the life of the people, right? They were the epicenter. They were emotional, they were physical. And I love this and it fascinates me to no end. So we said if tanks were the life of the people, if they had this connection, how can we bring that back in its own way, in its own context today? So we made a speculation for the future to say, of course, we can't bring the paddy field back, but we can attempt to bring back this relationship with the tank on the left. So we made this scheme. We did a couple of imaginations for this relationship, this new relationship, a renewed one, you could say. And this is the entrance to the neighborhood. And then this is how we said it could be. And we took these and we had a community Zoom call. Now, many residents in this neighborhood have been here for decades. The lake has always looked the same, bad. And this was the first time they were seeing visuals for a future that was different. And for some people, it moved them. And that's beautiful. And so Tina started this page and a weekly cleanup. We meet every Saturday morning from 8 to 9. And that's Tina Nandi photo. And every Saturday for an hour, we clean the lake. And we clean not because trash is evil or because we enjoy picking up trash, but because now there's an imagination. We are working towards something that's different, right? There's this speculation that people have seen, and we now have a goal. So we're collectively and slowly working towards this end. And because we've started coming together for these cleanups, we've realized there are other possibilities in the neighborhood. There are problems, but also possibilities. We made a few speculations for a native flower plot down the street, and every Sunday we meet in this space at our home, the ground floor, and we thrash out these ideas and these problems. There are a lot of senior citizens here, but I promise there are some young people also, but it's great. And we're speculations have been the starting point for new things, new physical, tangible goals in our neighborhood. And we love that. And this garden in the background, it looks something like this. It's completely and totally irrigated by treated water. So all the water we use in the building is naturally treated, gray, black. It's all treated and used within the property. And I like to think in a way we are living Hector Tulik's dream. So he wanted to implement this kind of system for all of Bombay. He failed, but his vision is living on in its own intimate way in this small plot in Bangalore. And shortly after we moved in last April, a friend came to visit and he saw the garden. A friend from Bombay came to visit. He saw the garden and he was astounded. And he said, "This is powerful." And he said, "I have a proposal for you to think about." He said, I'm involved with a community group in Bombay that for the last year has been looking at this empty patch of reclaimed earth and they've seen nothing change. Can you help us? He said, you have deep imagination, you're visual. Can you help us create a future vision for this piece of land? And I said, absolutely not. I'm not a landscape architect. I'm not an expert. He said, that's okay. We'll get permaculturalists, we'll get landscape experts, but help us visualize. Hey, hey, guys, quiet. I'm in a meeting. Thank you. We'll get the team. So I said, okay. And we built a team. We got an amazing perma who worked with us. And over the course of months of discussions with her, with community group members, with a wider community group, we created something special. But what was fascinating when they came to me, all they had was text. And they had realized the limitation of text. As great and as inspiring as it can be, it has a very clear limit. And they wanted to go beyond that into a visual world. So we took this blank slate of sorts and I made a sketch, a very simple sketch of how I thought spatially we could organize the space. And then I called Aniket and said, we have this new speculation and it's like a big thing now and it's a real thing for the future. Will you work on it? And he said, of course, because the more creative you are, the more it inspires other creatives. So we got to work and we said, how can we organize this space? First, Bombay, southwest edge of the city will have intense monsoon breezes. There'll be a lot of salt. So we create a salt buffer with pandanus, mangrove type of species. And then we'll have a windbreak behind it, which will buffer that intense breeze, which otherwise would fell trees inside the space. And then we placed an evergreen forest facing the city side. Adjacent to that was to be this mixed within was a deciduous forest. And then transition gardens where the scale of plants started to come down. So you started to create this cocoon of sorts. And within these were to be keystone species from the ficus family. And then pathways were to, of course, weave within and out with these central courtyards where people could rest, could play, recreation with shade trees along the pathways. So you could use the space even in the middle of the day. And it was very exciting for especially the community group to see visually this imagination that's lived in their minds, but not knowing what it would actually look like or how to do it, to be able to bring this to some form of tangible visuals. And then we said, of course, we must make eye level views. So again, drawing from the Bombay Imagined learnings of sketches, we made this sketch and said the idea that this green space should be a complete cocoon. When you're here, you should forget the city, except for a few moments. So we said maybe only the imperial towers, when you see their peaks, you realize you're in Bombay. Otherwise, you forget the city in this space. And we're pushing the idea of what this environment can be for every city resident. And then we said, what if this ancient coastline, this was low tide. He said, what if this could weave into the storyline as well? Because every reclamation in the city's history to date forgets what was there before and just fills land and moves forward and forgets the past. So he said, maybe this footprint of the ancient coastline could become one of the pathways that you walk on. And so when you're walking through that space on the right would be the intertidal zone. And then you're walking on the ancient coastline, you see the intertidal zone. And then on your left is the erstwhile sea. And then for lights, we said maybe to feed into this would be small memorials of species that had been lost through this reclamation, almost like a form of confession for desecration of this unique environment. And it would have been the first and only reclamation that memorializes the city's natural past with a native ecology for the future. And all the trees planted with the permacultures were native species. And it was a really special and unexpected experience. And the group made an Instagram page. It pretty quickly garnered a fair amount of followers, all completely organic. And a lot of people hate the scheme, but a lot of people also loved it. And this particular image had 2.5 million views. It was a small video. That means potentially 1 out of every 10 Bombay residents saw this video. And I think that is one of the powers of speculation, that it connects with and reaches people who won't want or are just not inspired by reading a lengthy verbose text. And then after we had finished this new imagination for the Coastal Road Reclamation, at the same time, Bombay Imagined was going for a second edition print. And we said, let's add this scheme into the book. And so we added it as the 201st project. And what I love about this is Bombay Imagined first edition 2022, it's completed. Many of the projects in that book inspired the making of the space that we call home. And I see this over and over, speculations inspiring further creative work. And then an experience of this home, this space, inspired a friend to collaborate on this coastal forest scheme. Then this scheme finds its way back into the book. And the book is the book, so it completes this cycle. And it fascinates me because it's all completely unpredictable, but there's this invisible energy that just keeps propelling things forward. And it's beautiful and I love it. And when I see this scheme, this plan for a large reclamation in Bombay, I'm reminded of a plan from 1921. And this is the last plan we'll look at this evening, and then we can chat. And this is one of my favorites from the book. I have many, but it's from 1921. It's an anonymous city resident, and it's a plan for the city 50 years hence. So it's written in 1921, but it's a vision for the city in 1971. And it's this really long newspaper article. It's a new city, garden suburbs. This is how this individual described it. Everywhere, described the city of the future, Bombay of the future, everywhere order and cleanliness. It seemed to me that a wizard wand had been waved over the slum district that I had known. Okay. And then I made a sketch of this, and I had to use color this time because this individual wrote so vividly and richly of this future city. And there was Back Bay was to be reclaimed, and it was to become a park and a garden and forest. There were to be flying taxis. That's Back Bay. There were to be flying taxis all throughout the city. Nobody was to be stuck in traffic. The streets were to be orderly. There were to be travelators at ground level and in subways. And then this individual said this: I had fallen off the seat on which I had gone to sleep on Malabar Point and had rolled down the slope. Only the railings had stopped me from falling into the sea. I staggered to my feet and looked wildly around. Yes, I had been dreaming. This poor individual, this dream, it was actually a literal dream while this individual was sleeping, a literal dream. But what I love about this person woke up from this dream, likely became depressed, but yet took the time to write the dream down, right? This in 1921, this individual wrote down this dream line for line, sent it to the Times of India. They published it. We found it about 100 years later and made this visual with it. Now this visual is the cover of the second edition of Bombay Imagined. And it's now there are about 1,500 copies floating around different bookstores, different homes. This dream is now living in people's homes throughout the world, which is just crazy. And a few weeks ago, I was in Rotterdam and I was in an elevator. I was there for a conference on city making. And in the elevator of this, it's a mixed use building in central Rotterdam. The festival I was at was on the top floor. And I got in the lift, pressed 7 to go up, and I noticed, oh, like in May, they have yoga class, they have lunch, they have coffee Thursday. And then I saw an ad for the festival. And I looked and I couldn't believe my eyes because there was the dream, right? That anonymous Bombay city resident who had this futuristic dream vision in 1921, who wrote it down, sent it to the press, they published it, we found it, as I'm sure many others have through history. We found it, and now this dream is living in some random lift in Rotterdam. That blows my mind. And that's one of the things I love about speculative work, whether it's literature, whether it's drawings, whether it's visuals, paintings, art. It has lives that we cannot predict. And it's a beautiful, I think, beautiful thing. And it's completely wild. And I love that. And this dream will hopefully, touch wood, continue. In 2027, we're hopefully in January, touch wood, between us, planning to open an exhibition at CSMVS in Prince of Wales Museum in South Bombay, in the space that they call the Mumbai Gallery. And at the entrance of the exhibition will be a large kind of folding imagination, this dream. And I'm super excited for it to live on and hopefully inspire many others as they come in and explore this at a really large scale. But what I am most excited about the exhibition, there are many interesting parts, and if anyone wants to chat more about it, I'd love to. But we're planning an unbuilt library, right? Which again, in my mind, is a library of speculations, visions unrealized, visions for the future. And it'll be a tactile library, not like for show. You can actually come and touch and read and engage with the books. There'll be a large collection of related books on Mumbai, but also a global collection. It'll be around 40 to 50 books in total. Again, all thematically unbuilt speculative work, including Invisible Cities, which kicked off my exploration in 2002. But what I'm most excited about is this book. It's called Tarangi's Dantium. It's a fascinating publication. I came across it just a few weeks ago. And it's Tarangi was an Italian architect. And in 1938, he made a plan, an architectural plan for Dante's Divine Comedy. And it was to be a physical manifestation, physical construction of the Divine Comedy. I love it. I love it. It was to be just really a stone's throw from the Colosseum in Rome. This was one of the perspective drawings. This was Taragni's imagination for hell architecturally. This was purgatory, where you get a sense of the sky, but it's still cut out quite a bit. And then this was his imagination for paradise, all glass, lots of light. I love it. And when I step back from all of this, I see this fascinating and intriguing and inspiring rhythm that you have an individual creating something speculative. Dante in 1320 creating the Divine Comedy, the speculative literary vision of the afterlife, right? He's imagining this based on the information he has at hand. And then nearly 700 years later, Taragni drawing inspiration from his speculations, speculating architecturally. And then about 60, 70 years after that, here I am messing around with colored pencils, speculating through drawing on Dante's Divine Comedy. And it's just one begets the other. And before you know it, nearly a millennium has passed and people are still being inspired. And then when I think about this rhythm and this cycle, I see the same thing in this dream from 1921, that this dream begot this image and this book cover, which will hopefully beget this exhibition. And we have no idea what will happen when people come and experience this exhibition and they see visions for the future. Maybe they'll be inspired and then create their own speculation in whatever form it may be. But what I love about both of these examples, they start with someone speculating, someone when creating, not for the sake of it, but because something has driven them over the edge. And Charles Bukowski, the writer, has this really great phrase. He says, most people write because they want to be known as writers. The ideal thing, he says, is you must write because something's driving you over the edge. I love that. For me, and I think for all of us, I think that's the challenge. What is driving us over the edge that without creating this certain thing or this experience, life feels incomplete. And once we find that and we create it at whatever cost or challenge, it inspires people. Dante's work is inspiring people 700 years later. This anonymous Bombay resident is inspiring people more than 100 years later. And we cannot anticipate. And I think that's when I said the title, let's talk the power of speculation. When I look at these two, I see the power of speculation lived out, and it's scary and in a really exciting way. So with this, I will close and happy to chat and discuss. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Wow. Robert, thank you so much, man. What a roller coaster.